It's the 1st of September 2015, and this is episode 243. This show is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Cryptocurrency is new, empowering, and exciting, but we're not experts, just obsessed companions walking the road towards a more peer-to-peer future. On today's episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin, we're at the recent Keynote 2015 conference, courtesy of Mo Levin and Rob Mitchell of the Bitcoin Game. LTB is all about looking at this intriguing, multifaceted, enabling technology we call cryptocurrency from all perspectives. And today's we've got a pretty darn interesting one. Bitcoin and the blockchain is different things to different people. Well, today we hear from some of the founders of Fintech startup Token, not to be confused with my company Tokenly, that aims to do Satoshi one better and get Bitcoin right for the banks. Let's listen in to their backgrounds, the how, and their why. Enjoy the show.
I'd like to invite our next speakers are Yobi Benjamin, the former CTO of Citibank, Steve Hirsch, the CEO of Token, and Todd Harris, the CFO of Tech Credit Union. They're going to be having a bit of a fireside chat, panel discussion about Token, their histories, and what brings them here.
Do we have any bankers in the room? I am surrounded by bankers right now. So my name is Steve Hirsch. I'm the CEO of Token. And just to give you, since probably nobody in this room knows who we are, what we do, just by way of, because they've probably heard of Citibank? Yeah. And Texas is a credit union, $2 billion in Silicon Valley. And I'm a serial entrepreneur, started a bunch of companies, invented some key internet technologies like the optical mouse and one of the early desktop publishing companies, Frame Technology, did one of the first internet search engines, InfoSeek, and a bunch of other companies. So I've been around and actually got started with the internet at the very early days of the internet, worked with FinSurf and other people who actually created the original internet protocol. So I've been around for quite some time. And more recently, I got involved because I hired a guy named Adam Back. And how many people know who Adam Back is? Okay, great. So Adam is the guy who came up with this scheme called Hashcash, which is a basis for the proof of work scheme in Bitcoin. So the people that are spending all of this money to mine the blockchain, they're using his protocols. And Adam told me about Bitcoin years ago, and he said, hey, you should really check this out. And I ignored him up until the time I was at this conference in Las Vegas called Money 2020 with a lot of bankers. And I went up to the microphone and I asked the audience how many people have Bitcoin. And I expected almost nobody in the audience to have Bitcoin because these are all bankers, and bankers tend to be very conservative, and we all know that bankers sort of have this aversion to Bitcoin. And to my surprise, about 25% of the people in the room raised their hands, and that was pretty shocking to me. So I ended up learning a lot about Bitcoin and investing. So.
Hi, my name is Yobi Benjamin. Like Steve, I've been around. I was one of the first engineers at Lotus Development Corporation, worked on Lotus 1, 2, 3, which we took public, got bought by IBM. Then I did Cambridge Technology Partners, which we took public also. And after that, I became a senior partner at Ernst & Young. I was chief of global strategy for Ernst & Young worldwide. And my last gig was I was global chief technology officer of Citigroup Institutional Clients Group, Global Transaction Services. And now I'm the CTO of Token. This has been a very interesting set of events for me, how I got here. I heard about Bitcoin like Steve many years ago, and did have a Bitcoin account and was a fervent, Bitcoin guy till I ended up in Citibank. When I was at Citibank, I operated in 148 countries, and I moved on a daily average 3 to 9 trillion dollars a day.
Unfortunately, you didn't get to keep any of it.
And we don't keep any. We work on a few basis points. Globally, we move 1.25 quadrillion a year. So I have a different point of view of money and the movement of money. I move money for governments, People's Republic of China, Russia, the entire EU, Procter & Gamble, and I also did commercial cards, commercial credit cards. So I have a very different view of money. And when I first met Steve, I said, I realized how expensive it is to move money. And that's partially the reason why Steve and I had a Vulcan mind meld and said, we can tackle this. Anyway, I'll let Todd get into it.
Well, I'm Todd Harris. I've been a C-level executive at kind of smaller regional institutions, banks, credit unions, finance companies for the last 12 years. And I guess I'm really participating here because being in that position, I see a real need for improvement in the payment system. And we've partnered up with these guys a little bit, helping them do certain proof of concept ideas. And there's a huge need out there for improvement, not just for fraud, but for efficiency and things like that.
So I didn't tell you what Token does, so with that background. So what I discovered, I started to try to form a Bitcoin company because I had the bug, and my Bitcoin was going up by 3 times every 3 weeks, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And then I put $1 million in, and of course that was at $1,000, and now I'm like, waiting for it to recover. But I tried to start a company to do Bitcoin. And what I discovered was that I couldn't find a bank who would open up an account for me. And that's just to pay my employees. So I have a 30-year relationship with Silicon Valley Bank. And Silicon Valley Bank is the banker behind Coinbase. And I went to Silicon Valley Bank and I said, hey, I'm doing this Bitcoin company, I'd like to open an account. And they said, go away. I've been a customer of that bank for 30 years. And they told me to go away because I told them I was doing a Bitcoin company. So I thought, maybe they're trying to tell me something. And I also talked to a lot of people who said, oh, well, if you're a Bitcoin company, you also have to get a money transmitter license because if you want to be legal. And so I looked into that, and that was about maybe 3 to 5 years of time, depending on how things go. And it was maybe $2 or $3 million. And that sounded doable. But then I discovered something very interesting, which most people never hear about, is that once you get the money transmitter license, so you can do this legal Bitcoin stuff, and then you try to go to a bank, because now you're totally licensed and legal, right? What happens is once you get the money transmitter license and you go through hoops and you get fingerprinted 34 times, is that the banks tell you they will not do business with you because you're too risky. And so I said, man, this is not working out for me. I don't know how the other guys are doing it, but this is not working out for me. So what I decided to do was to say, hey, can't beat them, join them. And so what I did is I took the concepts from Bitcoin and other crypto technologies that I worked with Adam, and I created this company Token to create an alternative for banks to license that was designed for the banking system, designed for banks by bankers and technologists that could work and provide the same functionality that Bitcoin provides, but provide it within the context of a bank so that it's legal and KYC'd and all the parties are known and so forth, and would actually go way beyond what is possible in Bitcoin because you're dealing with trusted entities. And so there's some shortcuts that you can do that you can't do in the blockchain. And what I discovered is that I could create a system where, using our system, it's very easy to create a token that could emulate any kind of existing payment rail, whether it be a check, a prepaid debit card, a cashier's check, foreign currency, a gift card, whatever. I could, ATM machine, that I could actually very quickly program that up and create these new paradigms for payments that were never before possible. And I said, wow, this is actually way better than Bitcoin and the blockchain ever will be. And so that's how I got into this.
So my thing is, when I was at Citi, one of the things I did is I met with very, very senior, not even senior, the people in charge of monetary systems. So I would meet with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. I would meet with the People's Bank of China, which is their central bank. I would meet with the Russian Finance Ministry, the Office of the Controller of Currency here, the Federal Reserve of New York, Federal Reserve of Kansas, Federal Reserve of San Francisco, and so on and so forth. And what I discovered, because I was also chairman of Citibank's Global City Innovation Labs and Research and Development Organization, I really wanted to investigate blockchain. Well, I walked into the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and the first thing they looked at me and they said, no way. You are not even going to begin a discussion. So that was Hong Kong, which is a bastion of capitalism. Went to Singapore. Singaporeans said, hell no. Went to the Chinese, People's Bank of China. They said, no way. So now we have major money centers in the world: Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Moscow, London, with the EU, Bank of England, all looking at me and saying, no way. So at the level of global monetary system, the simple answer that I got through the 3 years that I worked at Citi is, there is no way this is ever going to be implemented on a global monetary system. So I began to look, again, like Steve, by happenstance, we looked at it from different points of view. So that's why we ended up with Token.
Yeah, and ironically, the way that we met is that Yobi was contacted by one of the biggest banks in the US, and they wanted him to find a speaker who could talk about Bitcoin. And Yobi called up the head of the Future of Money conference and said, hey, who would be good? And they gave me, and my name was given to Yobi, so I gave the talk. And so we actually met through a Bitcoin connection, even though we had both realized, well, I guess at the time I was still, I hadn't realized.
We're still a Bitcoin fanatic then.
Yeah.
Well, you've heard the money center perspective and the technology perspective. And with a lot of my experience in the retail space, from the average Joe perspective, when you look at payments, you're thinking of credit cards and debit cards primarily. And one thing that gives them the most pain really is, this identity theft, these, breaches, these card replacements, these inconveniences. And so from a third perspective even, not even technology or money center, you come back to how can we make the current rails more secure and faster?
Yeah, I mean, ACH, 5 days, whoop-de-doo.
Yeah. So it's interesting because when you look at all of our current payment rails, the traditional rails that people use, the credit cards, or the payment cards in general, ACH, and checks, it turns out that all of them were invented before the invention of the internet. And they haven't changed much. So like the ACH system, which they're trying to modernize, they haven't really changed that ACH system that, moves the bulk of the money, a huge amount of money.
110 years. It's fundamentally the same system for 110 years. Credit cards invented 1959, 56 years ago. And that credit card rail is still, at its very core, fundamentally the same.
So we kind of thought that it was time to upgrade the system, and in fact, we're actually getting a lot of great traction when we talk to banks about, hey, we can apply cryptography, and we can apply modern ideas to how we move money so we can do it securely and fast, and way faster than Bitcoin, actually. So when we move money in our system securely with crypto protocols, we can move it in about a millisecond between banks. And it's verified, it's there, it's spendable. And every site that I go on to try to move money with Bitcoin, I have to wait an hour for that money to move. So, sometimes I listened to the speeches earlier and everybody's talking about, the solution is the blockchain. And I scratch my head wondering, well, why can't I publish this information on the World Wide Web? And I could even digitally sign it to prove that it's never been tampered with. And, why do I need to use the blockchain? Because the blockchain, there are all of these servers that have to go and keep a copy of whatever I post. That seems awfully inefficient. And plus they're doing this hashing algorithm that uses an awful lot of energy and is a extremely inefficient way to provide distributed consensus. And there are actually much better algorithms for distributed consensus, like the one used by the Ripple spinoff. Stellar, thank you. Yeah, the Stellar Consensus Protocol, SCP. And so they're actually better algorithms that use far less energy to achieve a distributed consensus. So when we talk about the blockchain, maybe we should be talking more about distributed consensus in general. And maybe the blockchain, is if all you know is the blockchain, then it seems like the answer to every problem. But there are a lot of problems that we talk about here that don't really need the blockchain.
Scale is a really big issue. I mean, when I mean scale, the global movement of money, everything from moving 1 penny to a few billion or even $500 billion, which, that's a lot of money movement globally. And I just don't see, I can't imagine how you would do the movement of money at the scale of billions and billions of transactions per second. I just don't see it happening. I mean, and again, perhaps I'm tainted by having been a city banker in a very large institution. I mean, we run our own private network at Citibank, That's why we're a correspondent bank to many, 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 many banks. Because we operate our own network, and our network can literally move money in like milliseconds today.
So probably thousands of transactions per second.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think that the last time I checked, and this is a while ago because I haven't kept my Bitcoin knowledge, but last time I checked that the blockchain was limited to 7 transactions per second because of the block size. Has that changed at all?
Does anybody know that?
It's still 7 transactions per second?
That would never work.
Well, they're working on it. Block size debate is going on right now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, because the last I checked it was, a couple of years, it was probably a year or so ago, it was 7 transactions, so still 7.
We need millions of transactions per second. I mean, if you have ever seen a global monetary system work, you need millions of transactions per second. No question.
There are proposals, and it's Lightning Network. I mean, they're trying to build the TPS rate in their own time and scale.
Yeah. The other frustration I had with Bitcoin is that when Adam told me to get into Bitcoin, I said, okay, fine. Who's the company I call that's that's building this? And he said, well, there isn't one. And I said, then I'm not sure even how I get started. And so one of the problems, one of the beauties that Bitcoin has is that it's it's sort of distributed and distributed consensus in terms of what is put in. And sometimes that can be an advantage, and other times it can be a disadvantage. So things like smart contracts and all that don't get into Bitcoin because they're deemed as risky and so forth. So you can't move necessarily as fast as you might want to, and you have to achieve consensus in order to do stuff. And it's kind of like, hey, look at our Congress. I mean, our Congress is a great example of, wow, if you have 400 people or so, once you get of any size, it's very, very difficult to achieve consensus, and you just get gridlock. And so that's another kind of another problem with, for all of its benefits, there are also some things to consider.
So the other thing that's important to think about when you look at these cryptocurrencies and the movement of money in general is really the politics behind it. This is not a technology problem, period. So when I was in China, when I spoke to a very senior finance minister, I asked why they wouldn't even consider it. And then his answer to me is, have you ever heard of the Uyghurs? And I go, Uyghurs, what's a Uyghur? Well, it's this Muslim minority up north. They don't want them to move money anonymously, period. End of story. They have Falun Gong. Don't want them to move money anonymously, period. They don't want money coming in anonymously. You try Singapore. Singapore, the bastion of capitalism. Guess what? Also one of the world's most tightly controlled governments. They don't want this. Here in the United States, you know, and we were just talking, Todd brought this up. Heaven forbid, and I truly mean this, heaven forbid that one of these new ISIS recruits that are a lone wolf is found with a Bitcoin account. I can tell you that that will annihilate any support, public support, for in Congress and any regulatory agency for anything Bitcoin related. It is an extremely political issue.
Today's episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin is brought to you by GetKeepKey.com, an easy, secure Bitcoin hardware wallet available a little bit later this year. One of the most interesting things to me about hardware wallets is that in the not-too-distant future, you'll be able to log into many sites and services just by proving that you own a Bitcoin address. In addition to authorizing your Bitcoin spending, the private keys that control your wallet can also be used to sign messages. Signing a message is the equivalent of entering your password. Both demonstrate that you're the person who has access because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do what you just did. Passwords can of course be guessed, and wallets can of course be hacked, but if you've got yours in a Keep Key, you're not vulnerable to any of that. For more information about the Keep Key or to sign up to be the first to know when it's available, visit getkeepkey.com. And the magic word for today's episode is login. That's Login. Log in. You've got until the 8th of September to visit letstalkbitcoin.com or the Let's Talk Bitcoin iOS app to enter it for your share of the listener rewards. Let's rejoin the conversation now.
I hope we're not coming across as Bitcoin bashers, because I think the technology is really cool, and it was I think a very innovative and very clever solution to the problem of creating a distributed consensus and creating a currency that wasn't controlled by anyone. And on the positive side, you know, there are some interesting things that are going on. So Ripple, for example, when I've talked to banks and they ask me about Ripple, and there are a number of banks that are looking at using Ripple not as a front end for not consumer facing, but just as a rail to replace SWIFT. So as to move money between banks, so it's just bank to bank, so from trusted entities that are clearly KYC'd, and then it's not seen as much of an issue. And so it's that technology has had some very passionate people taking a look at it and doing evaluations.
I'm a fan of Bitcoin, don't get me wrong. I mean, if people think I'm bashing Bitcoin, not at all. My issue is I can't use it for banking, you know, and I've seen it. You cannot use it on a global banking scale. It's just not possible right now, politically. Now, if individuals want to use Bitcoin, use its anonymity, and they can figure out some bank who would do it on behalf of individuals, I'm all for it. I think Bitcoin can do that, and you know, Bitcoin should continue to do that. But from a commercial point of view, from a global banking point of view, I just couldn't see it. But you know, if I still have a Bitcoin account, love for you guys to send me some Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the reasons for the problems with the regulators is that when Bitcoin was conceived, it was conceived by someone who had no banking experience at all, and his objective was to create this currency that could go and just do an end run around the fiat currency systems. And so compliance with laws and regulations was not really top of mind, I think, when it was created. And even today, when people are adding features to Bitcoin, that I think compliance is also not top of mind for the people doing it, because they just, the thing is they don't have the banking background. And so to get the BSA alphabet soup of BSA, AML, OFAC, SARS, CTRs, all that stuff, that's knowledge that the people who are developing the protocols just never get exposed to, because it's almost like they're two different communities.
Well, I think that's Bitcoin's strength and also its weakness from a scalability standpoint. And Apple might not be the best company for this room to talk about, but if you look what they did with Apple Pay, they allowed the traditional financial institutions to participate, and you just have this massive adoption by the institutions supporting that. And you look like Samsung, Android, they're going to do the same thing with their payment systems. So when you look at that whole scalability aspect, allowing, I know disintermediation is a great way to try to make some money, but you got to scale that. And by cutting out the traditional players, I think that scalability becomes a bit of a challenge.
Yeah,
not to mention the alphabet soup.
That's a really good point of view, right? And Bitcoin, two individuals can independently go and say, okay, we're going to move money around. I don't need banks, I don't need intermediaries, I don't need this, I don't need that, which is great, right? I think it's wonderful. But the fact is, that's also, I think, the reason why institutions would say, so why would we support something that totally disintermediates us from the capitalist system that works with this? You don't need a Citibank, you don't need a tech credit union, you don't need, any bank. You don't need a central government. So if you don't, and say you are not party to this, human nature, I think, makes it so that they're not going to be your fans or allies. They're going to be adversaries. Maybe we should take questions,
Any questions? Yeah.
Steve, you've been through the Web 1.0, and at the time, the internet was certainly not a well-understood territory. It had regulatory issues. All of the kind of the foundational issues we're seeing today in Bitcoin were present then in a different way. What makes you think that there's such certainty around how this is going to go? I don't think we knew how things were going to go then. How do we think we're going to see things happen differently here in Bitcoin?
Boy, good question. Should I repeat the question?
Yes.
Yeah. So the question was that in the early days of the internet, there were things that may have been quite a bit different than the way people were used to, and we got through it there. And is Bitcoin just going through some growing pains, and we'll resolve the issues? And I think the answer is that I think it's really, really hard for Bitcoin because of the fundamental design of Bitcoin. So for example, we heard earlier, people were touting that, hey, in Bitcoin it's really cool because you can move money. All you need is somebody tells you what their public key is. And you can go and do a transaction on the blockchain and move money to their public key. And I was thinking about that, and that's pretty cool because you can do that, you can prepare that transaction totally offline, you can give it to the person, that person can post it to the blockchain, and bam, the money is moved and it's now in your account, totally anonymously, without the aid of a bank and all that. And I thought, well, our technology, a token, could do the same thing. But the problem is that if I did that, and if the money, in fact, was housed at a bank in the US, and I were to try to move money that way anonymously, that Todd would shut me down in about a heartbeat, in maybe less than a heartbeat. Because that sort of thing isn't allowed. You have to know who the other party is. You can't move money without, in today's world, you cannot move money without knowing, you can't even move 10 cents without knowing who the other party is. And so that's a sort of a fundamental built-in thing to Bitcoin that's going to be really, really hard to change.
Let me try to add a perspective there. I think that's one of the best questions I've heard. The internet, and I was there too during the early days of the internet, and I can tell you one thing that's fundamentally different between the internet. The internet was meant to be open, totally open. You know, it's like it's extremely resilient. It's extremely scalable. These are core attributes of what we know of the internet then and still the internet of today. In fact, it's gotten more resilient with IPv6, far more resilient, far better. Bitcoin has a sense of exclusivity. It's closed, really. I mean, you think, no, it's not, it's open source. But it's the transaction between two people, to the exclusion of a system around these people. And I think that's a problem.
How can you call something closed if two people have a transaction between each other? They don't have to go through the existing system. How can you call that closed?
Yeah, I agree with you. I disagree with him. So I'm going to be interested to see how he responds.
I call it closed because I call it closed because the current system requires the participation of an entire ecosystem. And now what you're saying is this ecosystem that exists, which is the global banking system, we don't want it.
You can still go through that system if you want.
Well, you can, but you don't. But that's not that's not the fundamental architecture. It's like I want to have a private transaction between myself and Steve. Period.
Use dollars if you want to. You also
It doesn't have to be public. You know, the thing I like about Bitcoin is it's accessible, right? If you look at every single payment rail we have in the United States, it's not accessible. It's closed. If you try to get on the ACH system and you want to do credit pushes, which are really low risk, that's a pretty easy thing for a bank to do, and maybe it takes a week or 2 weeks to get you approved to do that. But you have to get permission. Somebody has to go and look at your application, and you fill out some application to do ACH, and they may or may not give you access.
Fingerprinted also several times.
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. But if you're trying to pull money out of someone's account on ACH, that's a much bigger deal. And you will tend to be turned down at every, like I went to a big bank based in LA, I won't mention who they are. And I described what we were doing with Token and all that. And they said, okay, great. Why don't you open up a bank account first at our bank, and then we'll move forward with you because we like the technology that you're doing. And so they asked us all kinds of questions about, hey, what's your AML policy and because we said we wanted to do something really simple, that we were going to do billing for big companies like PG&E who are just billing a utility company billing its customers. And that we would pull money from the customers and pay it to a very well-established utility company. And so I tried to get approval from this big bank to do that. And they reviewed my application for 3 months. And it was question after question. You know, every time you answered, a week later they would come back with more questions. And after 3 months, they said, we'll open up an account for you, but we will not give you any access at all to the ACH system. So to me, that's a very closed system, and Bitcoin is something that it's very egalitarian, anyone can access it. So in my opinion, and I guess it depends on your point of view, I look at Bitcoin as a very open system.
Questions?
Yeah, hey Steve, it's Justin from NetKey. You know, I actually see, some pretty strong parallels, again, between the early internet and this, because if you remember when we were building the early internet infrastructure, the phone companies hated us. They didn't want to give us access to local loop lines. They didn't want to give us phone lines for our modem banks. We would get turned down when we tried to get access to dry DSL loops. Everything that we wanted to do to try and build the internet networks in the early days, the phone companies were against, and they wouldn't connect their closed networks to our open ones. But what happened was there was a societal change that forced them to be open, to the point that they now lost on net neutrality, right? Because society said we're now an open society, not a closed society with respect to communication networks. And so I guess if you try and look at it with that framing and perspective, what differences do you see in the existing banking and Bitcoin relationships to those early telecom and internet relationships?
Yeah, so, hey Justin, so it's the difference I see is one of legality and compliance with laws and regulations, because what was happening in the internet, it was competitive technology, but nothing that was being done, as far as I know, was against the law. And the problem with Bitcoin is that it was structured by someone who really didn't have a compliance at top of mind when he designed the system, and he designed a system which makes compliance virtually impossible. And so that's why it's not that banks don't like Bitcoin and don't want to touch it, but a bank can't touch Bitcoin because of compliance reasons. And so, that's, so Todd is you can probably...
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think traditional financial institutions would love to participate in this space and partner. Even if they're being cut out, there's still a relationship there that can be had that they can profit from. But like you said, it's the regulation. Until the feds want to back off on the regulation, there's going to be a certain amount of limited options that institutions have to support this type of change.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that it's not so easy to understand how Bitcoin works. And, it's not something that you can say, oh, it's really simple. And to be fair, very few people understand how the ACH system works or how payment cards work. But we're all familiar with it and it all seems to work. And so that's not a problem. But for some reason, you need to be familiar with how Bitcoin works if you're a regulator to approve it. And one of the things I hear from bankers all the time is that regulators hate anything they don't understand. And if you try to put anything that regulators don't understand, you're just going to you're just creating problems for yourself. And on the flip side, regulators do really want to do the right thing, and most of them are really good people and are great public servants and do a great job. But there is clearly, for all the bankers that I've talked to, there was a fear of that we'd never get this past the regulators, because maybe you might get it past one regulator, but you have, how many different regulators do you have at your bank?
4.
Yeah, four different
regulators.
organizations.
Everything that in a large bank like Citi, we're essentially regulated. Probably, first of all, 50 states, basically, and the Federal Reserve, Office of the Comptroller of Currency, Department of the Treasury, and there's a million other regulators, and then you multiply that by 148 countries. And any one of those countries can have an effect on how you move money globally, particularly the large ones like the EU, not a country, but a group of countries, the EU, China, Singapore, Hong Kong, Russia, they all have the ability to affect the way you move money.
So we got time for one last question. It's in the back.
I hear that it doesn't work for them, and them can be either regulators or them can be big banks. But just as a way of introduction, my name is Scott. I'm with a company called Alpha Points and power exchanges around the globe. My current clients and my prospective clients are talking to the highest levels of governments around the globe, and they are eager and actively looking to embrace Bitcoin because they know it will help their people. So when we talk about it's not good for them, I always want to know exactly who them is. So is it the status quo? If it's the people that are going to get disrupted and intermediated, of course they're not going to support it. But there's more than one system on this planet, and there's a whole group of people out there that the system isn't working for. And there's actually people fighting for those people, and it's right for them. So maybe your target audience, it may not be right for, that might be fine. Maybe your solution is right for that target audience. But to kind of throw a blanket on it and say that that's all these drawbacks and it's never going to work because regulators aren't going to take it, they're not going to take it, I just don't think it's an honest discussion.
No, I agree with you. No, we were talking about it in the United States and some other countries, but clearly, no, absolutely. Bitcoin is a huge advantage to people, like let's say you're in Greece, right? And you've got a current, you don't know what's going to happen if they go to their own currency, Bitcoin could be a...
Bitcoin could do well for Greece, I think the Greeks should go and do Bitcoin because I don't see them going to the drachma, but I don't see China doing it, which is 16% of the global economy.
Yeah,
the US is 24.
So China, for example, and I don't deny that there are great places and great fits for Bitcoin, but I know that China, the true story, I'll tell you that I was told that the true story as to why the Chinese government was putting a lid on Bitcoin companies in China. And it wasn't because of fear of the currency. It was for fear that if Bitcoin got a hold in China, that because Bitcoin is so volatile, that it could wipe out a lot of wealth and create all sorts of havoc in China. And so that's the reason that I heard, and I don't know, what the truth is, but that was a reason that I heard that the Chinese government was a very go slow, was directing companies in China to have a very go slow approach to Bitcoin because of the volatility of Bitcoin. And, maybe that will change. But that, so that's different countries, different problems, different issues, different opinions of the government. But, in general, I agree with you. This is not a one-size-fits-all.
No, it's not. And, I think you're right. It's like there's some countries who want to experiment with it. Fine. I mean, there's a whole bunch of countries that don't deserve to run their own currencies. I hate to say that, but, they'd probably do better with Bitcoin, but I just can't see it when I look at the largest money centers in the world not supporting it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin. This episode was sponsored by GetKeepKey.com. Content for this episode was provided by Keynote 2015. This episode was very lightly edited by Adam B. Levine and featured music from Jared Rubens and General Fuzz. Any questions or comments? Email Adam at letstalkbitcoin.com.